Everybody knows good work is hard to come by. And if Dracula could have been just a morsel nicer to Renfield, he could have retained his ultimate servitude for at least another century or two. And that should be a lesson to any terrible boss out there. Just be nice, maybe on Tuesdays, and you'll reap the benefits. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, today's film is Renfield, and I love Renfield. And you know what? Renfield was right to lash out against Dracula. It took him too long. He should have lashed out earlier, and we're glad he lashed out. Because you know what? If you're in a bad relationship, be it at home or in the workplace, extricate yourself from that relationship. And that's what this movie encourages you to do. And I love this movie. Renfield is really funny. If you have not yet seen it, I highly suggest you mask up and go see it in a theater with some friends. It's a good comedy. It's a good workplace comedy because Renfield works for Dracula. So it works on that level too. And what else works is the fact that we have director Chris McKay with us today. And I gotta say, I'd been wanting to have Chris in the series for quite a while, and I'm really glad that we were able to get him for Renfield. Chris made a movie that is absolutely silly but completely identifiable, and the comedy pops along with the action. The action is gore that is over the top. And I gotta say, we talk about it a little, but I love the look of the film. I love the universal horror tropes that are all throughout it. And this is tone that is very difficult to manage, and it was managed quite well. If you're not careful, this could have ended up like parody. It could have ended up in the realm of something like Love at First Bite or Transylvania 5000. And there's nothing wrong with those movies. They're funny in their own right, but this had a more real world approach to its comedy, even though it is supernatural and goes completely off the edge sometimes. But Chris did a great job. This is a fantastically fun movie, and I highly recommend you see it. And Chris was very forthcoming about his creative process and what it took to get Renfield in the can. So I know you'll dig this episode. And folks, I hope you'll give some love to today's sponsor, Screencraft. You know, breaking into Hollywood as an aspiring writer can be a confusing, convoluted business. Fortunately, Screencraft helps writers with both the craft of writing and the business of filmmaking. Screencraft.org has everything for your writing journey, from screenwriting educational material and video lectures with your favorite writers like J.J. Abrams and Sofia Coppola, to hands-on career consultative coaching with their writer development team. Their genre-specific screenwriting competitions feature judges that include Oscar and Emmy award-winning writers and top literary agents who really know their way around storytelling. This year's comedy competition welcomes executive producer of Ted Lasso and Shrinking, Bill Lawrence, as their grand juror, and he will select one writer to mentor from the competition. Hundreds of past winners and finalists have started their career with the direct support of Screencraft.org. Take, for instance, the experience of Shiwani Srivastava. After placing in the Screencraft comedy competition, the Screencraft team not only helped Shiwani develop her script, but pitched and sold it to Netflix, and also introduced her to her literary manager at Affirmative Entertainment. So if you're an aspiring writer, go check out the opportunities Screencraft has to offer at Screencraft.org. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You know, we recently published our Oscar issue. It was our 10th Oscar issue because we've been around. We're coming up on 11 years this June. And, you know, after the Oscars, we always put new content in the magazine. So there's always new things to see. For instance, Evil Dead Rise is going into the magazine, and that will be an interesting article for folks to read. And you could always check to see what's new over at backstory.net. You know, if you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue in our Backstory app on an iPad or at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop. And if you like what you see, and I hope you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. It would really mean a lot to me to have you become a subscriber, so thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with director Chris McKay about his latest film, Renfield. Well, so I was at your Cinematheque screening this past week with a very enthused crowd. I absolutely love Renfield. You did a fantastic job. But before we get to it, we're going to give our listeners just kind of a baseline of who you are and from whence dost thou hail?
Yeah, I went to Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, and then I went to Columbia College. So I studied. I was at SIU for 2 years. I went to Columbia College, and Columbia was, the reason I went to Columbia, besides they're a great program there, but also because they have an internship program to work on movies that are being shot. Were being shot in Chicago at the time, and so I got to work on Uncle Buck, the John Hughes, John Candy movie as a PA, and got to watch kind of how the movie was made. I got to go to dailies every day. That was great to see everybody and listen to what everyone was saying about the dailies. Was fascinating.
What was your favorite John Candy moment?
Oh, he was such a nice guy and so funny and so charming. I interacted with him a little bit. It's funny because like the first time I really had to talk to him, I had to tell him that like it was obviously Chicago, it was snowing. There was some problem with the cars getting there or something like that. And so he was sort of stuck. We were shooting in an old school, New Trier, I think. It was New Trier High School. We're sort of using the gym as where we had the sets on Uncle Buck's apartment. And so we were shooting there, and yeah, his car got, delayed or something like that. And so it was I don't know why they sent the PA to go tell John Candy that his car got delayed. I don't know why I was that guy, but he could have been like, he basically just hung out, and I just got to sit there and ask him questions about SCTV and that sort of thing, because I was really obsessed with Saturday Night Live and SCTV at the time, and so I just got to sit there and ask him questions, and he was just like, he could have been more relaxed. He didn't care the car wasn't there. He just wanted to sit there and talk and hang out. He's just been really like a genuinely nice human being, good human being. Yeah, it was kind of a pleasure to be around him. I got to, watch John Hughes work, and I was really surprised at how much improv he encouraged, since he's a writer and a director, and not that I, totally understood, some of that stuff at the time, but he did a lot of improv and tried a lot of things, and they went off and shot, stuff that was or had second unit shoot stuff with a little more like Looney Tunes. I mean, the movie's got some, some big, broad moments, and he's not like he's allergic to that stuff. 16 Candles, there's lots of broad stuff, but he went from 16 Candles to Breakfast Club, which was a little bit more grounded, and then, Weird Science. So I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was just really tickled with just how much stuff he was trying and finding on set. And then also him weaving in the dramatic stuff with the actress's name was Gene Kelly, spelled different than than Singing in the Rain, Gene Kelly. But yeah, I was surprised at just him flowing back and forth, and how he played music a lot on set to try to set the tone, for stuff that's going on. Yeah, he played a lot of, during a really dramatic moment with Gene Kelly confronting her mom. He played this instrumental thing from The Cure, and I was really just kind of blown away by just how free he just did that sort of thing. It was really cool. It was great. And when I was a really little kid, I went into the city and saw them shoot Ferris Bueller's Day Off, shoot the parade scene, and I got to kind of hang out and watch that. So that was it was awesome. In Chicago at the time, Hughes was shooting a lot of movies. Andrew Davis, who shot The Fugitive, or directed The Fugitive and stuff like that, was shooting a lot of movies. So there was a lot of stuff going on in Chicago at that time. So it was cool. It made the idea of being a director a lot more real for someone like me. So that was great.
That's awesome that you did that. Hughes is a legend. So he left us too soon.
Yeah.
It's really sad. I want to get to Renfield, but I still want to talk about your storied past for a second here. Tell us about breaking in and really finding your home with Robot Chicken. By the way, you rocked. I love Robot Chicken.
Oh, yeah. I loved working on that. That was great. That was my first job in Los Angeles. I was in Chicago. I was doing training tapes for doctors and nurses and news stuff, and had done my own independent film and worked on a lot of other people's independent films editorially, like commercials and that sort of thing. But I found out they needed an editor, and I had a conversation, an interview with those guys, and they were just about to start production on season 1, and they hired me, and I flew out and moved out to Los Angeles and started working on the show. And stop motion's it's obviously a form of animation, but it has a lot of similarities to live action production, because you have to find or make every single thing that happens on set, and you're dealing with real lights. You can't draw or computer your way out of a problem. You have to figure it out, right there. So because I had a live action background, I was able to move from editorial into producing and directing, Robot Chicken and Moral Oral, because they needed somebody who kind of sort of practically understand how to like run multiple sets. We had 15 stages and 13 animators and 4 people in lighting, and you have to organize the puppets and the sets because they're coming from 2 different departments. You have to kind of play the chess game with all these things. And I also wanted to shoot, it's as far as to try to get more production value out of the show, I wanted to shoot 5 episodes at a time. And when it's a sketch comedy show, you have to figure out if you can use multiple sets and amortize your sets and that sort of thing. So I was very lucky that Matt and Seth and Dino Stamatopoulos let me come in and kind of move into producing and directing as well as editing the show.
Was there anything that you remember that was just too racy and too crazy that like was on the idea board that never made it to shot, or something that was shot that just could never be aired?
I'm not sure. It's been 10 years, so I think maybe the statute of limitations on me telling the story is over. But we obviously did some Star Wars specials, and that was with the permission of Lucasfilm and George Lucas and all that kind of thing. And that was a lot of fun to do that, to be able to play in that world. I was a huge Star Wars fan and still am. There was a sketch where Han was in an alley and invited Luke Skywalker into the alley, and he had his pants down, and he said, "Okay, we're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home."
Oh my God.
That one surprisingly did not make the cut.
That did not make the cut.
So
did not make the cut.
Yeah.
Well, look, Lego Batman movie was a big deal for you. Tell me if anything that you could coalesce as your one big lesson that you learned on that.
I've done the Lego movie. It was sort of the co-director of the Lego movie with Chris and Phil. I was doing a lot of, I did all the animation. I was the animation director. I was the co-director. I was the co-editor and did voices and stuff like that in Lego movie. And so there was a lot, I think the thing that I learned on the Lego movie that I applied to Lego Batman was the animatic process, like really being really good and clear when you're making the reels with storyboards. Really learned how to hone that and make that as you have to communicate to everybody with that first animatic, like what you're trying to do with this movie. And it's very hard to get the boards and to feel like what the movie's going to feel like. So there was a lot of cutting out things in the boards and getting things to move and trying to add lots of sound design and getting the scratch voiceover to play and adding music and stuff like that. And that was, and sometimes color, we couldn't always afford to do color on storyboards, but oftentimes that was really helpful because you're just trying to get everyone to understand what the effect of the scene, and everybody interprets the script a little bit differently. Everybody, live action animation, whatever it is, like that process is very tricky because, you could be in a situation where the producer sees something one way and the studio sees something another way, and you as the filmmaker sees it a different way. The actors are going to bring something really interesting to the table. So using the animatic process to try to get everybody on the same page tonally and really make it feel like the movie, that's an art in of itself. And not every editor can do that. Not even every filmmaker can do that. But that was something that I learned a lot on the first Lego movie and then applied to Lego Batman. Lego movie was much more of a luxury. I was on that movie for almost 3.5 years. And Chris and Phil had been on it, like 2 years before that, like developing the script and getting it to a certain spot and stuff like that kind of thing. So I was really, we were spoiled on the Lego movie because the Lego Batman movie we had to turn around in about 2.5 years. So to go from no script, nothing, and turn that around. So we had to use everything to try to get the story up as quickly as possible and to try to show people what the movie was going to be. And we actually even had to, originally the release date was for the summer that year, but Ninjago was taking so long that they basically pushed their release date back a year, moved it forward a year. So we had to finish our movie sooner. We had to finish Lego Batman sooner. So really trying to get as many people as possible to feel what the movie is, to test it in front of audiences in a very rough state. And so you have to really, kind of hone that stuff down and make it feel as much like what the movie's going to feel like. That was a huge lesson. And it's something that I take into going into live action filmmaking now.
The Pixar process, they have about 4 years. They do multiple animatics through their process.
Yeah.
Huge changes happen with the story during those animatics.
Yeah.
When they realize that they get these rough versions of their script in front of them that sometimes are just not working at all. And I'm just curious for Lego Batman, last question there, how many animatics did you go through? Like, was there any huge change, or once you had your script working, was it really just a rush to the finish line of completing?
No, there was a huge change. I mean, on the Lego movie, we literally threw out almost the entire story on the first Lego movie and then started again. But on Lego Batman, there was definitely a direction that we were going in originally, and it became clear. The studio had it in their head that Batman going to therapy was the funniest thing in the world. So the Batman was seeing a therapist. And when we started to put that stuff up, it wasn't fun. It wasn't funny. Yeah. And it kind of felt like a bummer for a kid's movie to have Batman sitting in a therapist's chair as opposed to like going out in the world and, with Dick Grayson, Robin, and figuring out like the problem about being in a family, like on, in action on the road. And so that was a huge change. Once I was able to put, because again, they were very insistent that the funniest thing in the world is Batman sitting on a therapy couch, and that was a big part of the original script. And kind of once we took that out, the movie actually played a lot better, and it became more real as far as just like you really felt for Batman. You really felt for his, and I gave him more room to have fun with Robin, because Robin, Michael Cera as Robin playing off of Will Arnett as Batman was the most entertaining thing in the world, and obviously bringing in Zach Galifianakis as the Joker, and that's where some of that the I love you stuff. The I love you / I hate you stuff came out of all of that stuff. So getting rid of that thing really actually made everything, made the story better, made the jokes, the comedy better, everything.
Yeah, it's a place for drama, because I mean, even on the early seasons of The Sopranos, right? Like it was like, oh, gangsters in therapy, this is funny. But then it was very quickly like, nope, not funny. It's actually really dramatic and rehashing his traumas in the therapist. So probably not the best place to put a Batman.
No, it's like you're taking animation should be things moving, and you're out in the world and big stuff, and especially in a Batman where you can make a huge Lego Batman world and that kind of thing. Like it should be out in the world. And the idea of like him in an office and just doing overs and stuff like that in an animated movie. I mean, they made the comedy version of something like that when they made Analyze This. There's the comedy version of that thing, and that can exist, and that's great. But I think that I think obviously we made the right choice.
Really having that animation past and having to be so exacting about your frames, because you either have it in those animatics and storyboards and plan for it, or you don't. It's not like live action where, we could catch it on the fly, or we'll see what's on set. You have to make those sets. You have to make those shots. Yeah. It really, I think, refines a lot of people to make them good directors, good communicators of visual language. And, your next movie right before Renfield, Tomorrow War, you had a great visual style for that, your first live action movie. If anything, what was your biggest lesson on that? And then finally we could get to Renfield, I promise.
No, I love the walk down memory lane. Absolutely. The biggest lesson on Tomorrow War, I came on like 4 or 5 months before the movie was going to be shot, right? This was something that was a moving train. The studio had developed a script. Chris Pratt was attached. They had a window for Chris Pratt's schedule, and they're going to make this big, movie. The thing that impressed me about this script, there wasn't a lot of action in the script. It was very nihilistic on one hand. I think Zach did a wonderful job, but there was no comedy, and it was very dark. But the studio wanted to make a PG-13 all audience movie. The bleakness of the script wasn't going to be something that they were interested in. So these were things that attack. We had to put some big action scenes in the movie, and we had to figure out a way to make the movie a little bit more of an all audience movie. And the way I looked at that when I pitched them my take on directing it was, that this movie is basically like, it's, sci-fi, It's a Wonderful Life. Like if you saw a little bit of something about your future, what would you do? How would you change yourself? If you saw a little blink into your future, what would you do to change that? And some of that got a little bit, lost. Unfortunately, there were some dramatic turns that the script did that in previews the audience didn't track with, they didn't really love. So I kind of knew that some of that stuff was not going to play. And so I kind of wish that we had worked a little bit harder to get the studio to come around to try to come up with a different backstory for Chris Pratt's character.
Let's get into Renfield. Obviously Robert Kirkman has a story by credit. Ryan Ridley has the screenplay credit. At what point did you come on? Because the idea of Dracula's familiar, his assistant Renfield, having a crisis of self-identity is just the great setup for a comedy on its own. To make it into an action comedy is even better. So what was it like when you came on, and where did you find it?
Kirkman had written a treatment, and which I got to see later, and the first thing I received was Ryan's script. I think it was like a second draft or something, and I was just so impressed with like what he was doing with the world of Dracula. I mean, we've seen Dracula done a million times, and they're kind of, they're kind of all similar-ish, but he had such a unique take, and he and Kirkman had such a unique take on Dracula, and seeing it through the eyes of Renfield, a character that I know, but not necessarily a lot of other people know or care about. Maybe they know it's a weird guy that eats bugs and stuff like that, at best. But to see Dracula through the lens of his assistant, and in a toxic, Dracula as a metaphor for the boss from hell, a toxic workplace environment and codependency. You have Renfield dealing with issues of codependency and that sort of thing. Dealing with it, I mean, obviously it's a comedy and it's fun and all that stuff, but they have like stuff underneath it and to have the movie kind of be thematically about those kinds of things, and to be able to see it kind of play out with like Teddy, Ben Schwartz's character Teddy Lobo is kind of like a Dracula to Awkwafina's character Rebecca, but he's also like a Renfield to his mom, and you see all these people kind of playing out these roles. To me, that was kind of what was really great about the script and really great about that world, and the fact that they were also doing it with big, gory set pieces. Ryan had written some, kind of some really great launching pads for some really fun set pieces, and so that seemed like a world that I want to play in. And I got to, kind of, color it with a Mario Bava, Basil Gogos kind of color palette.
It looked beautiful. The color palette was so alive, and it totally fits those references. But even the early EC comics, the horror comic.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Creepy and eerie and EC. Yeah. Absolutely.
I love it. And I'm sure it wasn't easy to accomplish. So was that like in the storyboard stage? Was that how early it was coming in?
When I pitched the studio, I said, I wanted to feel like I pitched the Basil Gogo stuff. I had some images from Hammer movies and some of the Mario Bava stuff and things like that. Because I thought that was a way for us to be able to still ground it in a horror movie, but also give you permission to laugh. There wouldn't be so, desaturated and bleak or too sort of, pedestrian shot, so that it just feels like I wanted to make sure it didn't feel like a parody. I want to make it feel like its own movie, that it's that it's sort of whether it's like feels like a horror movie or just sort of has that tone, that it still felt like a horror tone, but didn't kind of take you out of it by being, like I said, kind of too like it felt like a Saw movie or something like that, or just like I said, kind of desaturated. Brought some levity to it, and then I could paint the blood a certain color, so the blood would feel almost ridiculous, as far as over the top. Everything could feel a little more over the top. It's meant to be a movie that's like very heightened and not real, not taking itself very seriously. Wanted to feel that's the closest I'd want to get to parody, where it didn't feel like the movie was taking itself very seriously, but I still felt like some of it needed to be grounded in a horror movie aesthetic. So that's what I pitched to the studio, and fortunately they were into it. It is tricky because I also was asking people to do a lot of stuff, because I also wanted it to be shot with a lot of practical lights. So meaning I didn't want a lot of lights and stands and things like that on set. I wanted all of the stuff to be coming from either above, like in the codependent meetings, or being shot through the set, or that the lighting units were in practical things on set. So I could shoot in a lot of different directions, so we could move fast, because I like to shoot with multiple cameras sometimes, especially for the stuff where it's long dialogue bits or improv stuff. I like to have a lot of cameras going so I can capture a lot of footage. I also want to run some of the scenes a little bit like a play, especially the codependent meetings. I want those guys to kind of kind of just be in the scene and in the moment. So that's very challenging. So fortunately, the lighting team did a really great job. Andy and his team did a really wonderful job with that. And then Dave Cole at Photochem, who's the colorist in the movie, came in and really helped and tweak out and just kind of wring every little bit of saturation we could out of the movie. So like everything in the movie, it's a huge team effort.
I would not have expected to have heard that you went for a practical lighting scope because it had such a stylized feel. I would have there would have been a lot of lighting stands on set and stuff like that.
Andy did a really great job. I mean, he and his team, really were wonderful as far as getting really interesting lighting, but not have a lot of. I mean, there's again, we're getting into close-ups and things like that. Yeah, he's bringing a light in next to the camera, or somebody's hand holding something, or they're doing some stuff to flag things off. So it's not, I'm generalizing a little bit to oversimplifying what Andy and his team did, but they really did, build like some nice building blocks for us. And then Dave Cole came in and with a lot of windows and stuff and Da Vinci and that sort of thing. Like he was able to like kind of like, just carve some extra, just put some extra shadow on one side or bring some saturation out or just pop a face here or there. Like stuff like that just makes all the difference in the world. And that's what I think, again, it takes a village. This whole team came together to make something that felt, I want it to feel different. I want to shoot with old lenses. Like, for a movie like this, I want to shoot with old lenses and uncoated lenses so that the light can kind of play around a lot in there. That was a big thing. I just wanted to feel different than other movies and have some affinity with old horror movies.
It had a great look. And, I'm curious about what other things happened during development. Obviously, we're almost to the spoiler section, so we'll get into that more. But, I mean, I've always loved Vampire's Kiss. So when I heard Cage was cast as Dracula, I'm like, this is going to be fantastic. And yes, the movie is called Renfield, but I mean, you're always looking forward to whatever scene Dracula's in genre in general. And so tell us about working with Cage, because I mean, the guy's a legend, and I know that he seemed quite committed to this role, which he just thrived in.
I wish we had more scenes with Cage. I wish we had more scenes with Cage in Renfield, Cage in Shore, the Bella Lobo and Ben Schwartz, Teddy Lobo. I wish we had a lot more Cage in the movie because he's wonderful. He's everything you want him to be, like on set, great, raconteur, super enthusiastic about the filmmaking process, loves making movies, loves building character. And I had one meeting with him where we talked about, before he agreed to play Dracula. I had one meeting with him where we talked about the movie and talked about what I wanted to get across. And then the next time I talked to him the very next Zoom, he was off book with all those speeches and everything else. He had a voice. He was already imitating his father. He wanted to imitate his father in the movie. And so he had this voice and this sort of mid-Atlantic kind of affect that he had, and very, continental and regal and decadent, and just immediately was in character. So he loves doing that sort of thing. It's very playful being with him, and he's full of joy, and it just feels like you're just a bunch of people. I've got a barn, let's put on a show. Like, it's that kind of feeling on set, and it's really great to be around. And Holt's the same way. I couldn't have asked for two better, go for it guys. I mean, Holt was so enthusiastic about doing like his own stunts and things like that on his day off, he'd come and do second unit stuff and things like that, because he just wants, can I get on camera doing that one thing? James is double, like James taught me how to do this thing. Can I do this? And he would just come in and do all that stuff. Like to work with people like that is such a thrill, and it's just really inspiring.
I'm still but said the Cage was off book that fast, and he had learned his lines that fast. That's awesome.
Yeah. Like, and he had a lot of respect for like what Ryan put down, and he was very gracious about any notes that he had and little bits of tweaks. I mean, most of his tweaks really just fell into the category of things that were like basically like just words, that he wanted to use. Like if the script said if a piece of his dialogue, he was going to say something is old, he would want to use something. He would want to use a word like antique, or he'd come up with something that was a little, multisyllabic, and something you could kind of just tell, like he just knew like he knew he could just like wrap his performance around a delivery of a word in that sentence. There was just that, it was changes like that, and there's things that he improvised and on set that were like really fun, and I love that. I encourage that. I really, we had a couple of meetings in my office, like, because Cage is only there for probably like, we shot for 3 weeks with him, and maybe he was there for a couple of weeks, maybe before that. But again, there's rehearsals, there's costume stuff, there's makeup, things. Yeah. There's it's stunt rehearsals, specifically stunt rehearsals, costumes, things like that, and makeup. So we would get together on the big scenes and go into my office and do some stuff with him, and and Holt and Aquafina, but it wasn't a lot. It was like it was in and around all this other stuff, going on.
There wasn't a
So it wasn't
rehearsal period before the film started.
No, which is unfortunate, and that's the way a lot of things go. But yeah, but he's again, we're talking with like real professionals, like he and Holt are just, Holt comes from the old school UK acting, tradition, British acting tradition, and so he's, he can do everything. He can sing, he can dance, he can, he's just got incredible training, and it just takes everything really seriously. But it's just so fun and funny, and he's completely vulnerable. Like he lets an audience in. He doesn't have walls up. His walls are always down, and he's just lets you, if you watch his eyes, you can see a million things going on behind his eyes. I really loved working with Nick Holt too. Both Cage and Holt were amazing.
I want to get to the spoilers. So tell us your budget and your schedule, and then we'll get into the spoilers.
The budget was, in the 60s, and we basically shot for 40 days.
Okay.
Mostly nights. So it was a lot of night shoots, which really takes its toll on the crew. I want to try to shoot as much stuff practically as humanly possible. Practical effects and practical makeup and all that kind of thing were real important. And I was very happy that the crew, obliged. I mean, there's deals you have to make. You have to, figure out, like, basically the deal was do the first 2 takes without doing anything practically. Those turned out to be the best. We would use, we'd do that digitally. We'd do, if we were using blood, for instance, we'd do that digitally. And then on the 3rd and 4th take, we'd do it practically. And then if we still hadn't nailed it, then we'd do the rest, without the practical effects.
When you say practically, you mean blood on set?
Blood on set, or explode, like little squib gags, in the set, things like that, sparks, all that kind of thing. Sometimes, it sort of blow things, to create debris and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of stuff like that especially when you're using guns and that sort of thing. There's lots of, there's a lot of gunfight. Again, if I can make it real, and there's a really cool shot that I really like with Aquafina kind of running through all these sparks and things are, blowing up, and it's in slow motion that, it's not something you can do in, when you're doing it later in visual effects. Like, it's something that, feels like it should be done on set. And that to me was a lot of fun to be able to do that kind of thing.
Well, podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see these Zoomcasts and see us talk, we're getting into the spoilers. So if you have not yet seen Renfield, it is in theaters. Mask up, take your friends and family, go see it. It is very funny, and you'll be happy that you did. And you have been warned. We are now going to get into the spoilers. It's really interesting because you brought up parody at the beginning, and that could have been dangerous for you as a tone. And I think what nailed it was your opening of the movie, in which you beautifully recreated Todd Browning's Dracula with Cage and Holt in the roles of, Dracula and Renfield. And you must have had so much fun doing that. Tell us what it was like just getting them in makeup for that, recreating exact shots from Dracula. It works on 2 levels. It sets the tone, but it also shows that you're catching up audiences that may have never seen the old black and white movie, because some modern audiences just don't watch that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why. I mean, I wanted to have a connection to the past just because I love those movies and wanted to show some love to the old Universal movies. And at the same time, I wanted you to really feel that Renfield and Dracula had a past. It had a real past 90 years ago. And what better way of doing that than to composite Cage and Holt into the Todd Browning, classic, Dracula on the staircase, the giant spider web behind him. And the sets are so amazing. And the costuming, was a lot of fun to try to see what we can get out of the Universal costume department and what Lisa was able to put together to make it feel like, the old outfits. And we did the makeup, very, we lit it just like the way they lit it, and we used try to guess whatever lens information we could figure out and try to shoot it with the same lenses. And
camera reports that you were using to do that.
We don't know if we had that level. I think it was just making some assumptions about what and how some of that stuff was shot, and basically like doing multiple tests of trying to get kind of the size relationship between, Dwight Fry and Nick Holt in the frame, and kind of going, okay, it's got to, same with the heights and stuff like that, just trying to trick you into believing that Holt and Cage were there as much as possible.
Looked awesome. I mean, was that one of the first things that you shot?
No, the studio didn't want it. The studio didn't even want to do any of that stuff. So I was fortunate that, like, yeah, that Jamie Price, who was the visual effects supervisor, figured out how to get that stuff to look right and did all the work with his team to composite all of that stuff and make all the stuff work and get the grains to match and everything else. Because it's just, yeah, there's a million things that have to be done, in order to make that stuff work. We actually did that in and around other stuff. So while we were shooting on one stage, doing other things, we had a green screen stage going, and when we could get Holt or Cage and could get them, out of whatever costume they were on another set, we'd bring them over there and then shoot them on the green screen stage so that we could, get we were basically like kind of, running multiple units at the same time. I think at one point we had, I want to say we had 3, if not 4 units kind of doing a bunch of different things like that, just to, get as much out of a day as we humanly possibly could. But yeah, we had the movie there so that everyone could kind of see, the what the performances were and even mimic, some of their, Renfield doffing his cap and all of that kind of thing. Just try to get the how stiff Dwight Fry and how the acting was at the time and all that kind of stuff. We were like trying to imitate it as much as possible, while at the same time having having Cage wasn't trying to do a Bela Lugosi impersonation, and Holt wasn't necessarily trying to do Dwight Fry, although obviously we did the laugh and a few other things, but still try to make it feel a little bit like our characters, but just make them a little more stiff, like an old, the way old, movies acting sort of feels today.
So you were almost doing it on spec to convince the studio that it would work as a side thing, right?
Yes, because it wasn't in the script either.
Right.
So it was a thing that we were just like, I was like, they need to have a past. Like, if it had been up to me, I would have shown, I sort of called that section the salad days section, because what I really wanted to do was to give you a quick, again, brushstroke, shorthand, but give you a quick history of Dracula and Renfield. And I would have taken it through, try to connect it to modern day, taking them through the Hammer movies and taking them through, the 70s and the 80s and that sort of thing. That would have been my dream, because then you get a sense of like, oh, they've been in this relationship for a while. Renfield's getting, more and more, Dracula's being maybe more and more abusive or manipulative or whatever we wanted to highlight. And you get a sense of the real relationship there, and also kind of Renfield kind of putting up with that and going along with Dracula. You want to see him getting worn down, and Dracula always getting into trouble and needing to get bailed out by Renfield, and Renfield getting exhausted by all that. There's a lot of stuff you could get out of it. Again, I'm not talking about like making 40 minutes of the movie, but like, pieces of that to get to just show how fun those guys probably had together in the beginning or something like that. Like, how is, Renfield's almost got a childlike innocence, like traveling the world and seeing all of this, seeing the wonders of the world. There's this guy who's a real estate lawyer who gets to go and, see the world with this guy, and how, because it's about, the seduction of how these charismatic people, so we've all talked about like bad bosses in Hollywood, and clearly it's more than Hollywood. They're everywhere, but like how these people can seduce people into acting sometimes against their best interests, and that they can kind of get people wrapped around their finger and submit themselves and their own personalities to this other person.
It worked perfectly, and I love how it goes back to your Robot Chicken days of having multiple shoots going on at once. I mean, you were really firing on all cylinders there, because you had that experience, and then using a green screen stage to recreate things. I'm guessing you then, once the studio finally was like, oh, okay, we get it, then I'm guessing you got nice plates and elements from the original films to composite into, right?
Well, we were always had to be in communication about like what it would cost to do these things. Like, you're still doing this budget, and you're always playing around. The half of your conversations, on a given day are about, the budget, like what's it going to cost to actually do this, and where you're going to get, if it's not going to be from the Universal Library, which we still have to pay for, where you're going to get that stock footage that's going to be in that background of that thing or whatever. Right. How are you going to do this? You're always...
I want to hear this. Tell us the answer, because you were secretly shooting something on the side that wasn't budgeted or approved because it wasn't in the script. So, I mean, just briefly, like what were your secrets there?
They knew that it was going to be shot, but it was also like this thing where it's like, but we could take that off if we need to, if something else needs to get shot, we're going to take that thing. We're going to take that thing off. So it's always this thing that was, and again, our ambition was to do more of it. And then that kept, from a budgetary standpoint, that kept getting whittled down. And so finally had to sort of like figure out a way. I mean, I kind of knew right away. I was like, even before we started, the first day of production, I was saying, guys, let's be smart, because we know we're going to get nailed on that stuff. Let's find a way to have a crew that's dedicated to that on the side. Because fortunately, we found this facility in New Orleans where we could build sets and have production office and things like that. So there was room to be able to go, let's just put in that corner over there, let's put a green screen stage in so that we can, plus we'd have to do all these tests, like I said, with Jamie kind of figuring out, lens and lighting dynamics and things like that. There's a lot of tests that we needed to do so that it could match as good as it does. So,
I mean, that's great because I can't imagine the movie without it. Obviously, I know the script probably would have started with the protective circle that they trap him in. So obviously that was probably in there, but having this all lead up to that point.
But that was only in there because they would have been happy with just Dracula and Renfield starting in modern day. They didn't want to do any of that stuff. Yeah, that was all stuff that we had to fight for and figure out how to budget in with everything else. So on top of the stuff in the past, that opening scene with all of the Dracula fighting, I had this idea that our first act needs to be the third act of someone else's movie. It needs to start like it's the third act of some other Dracula movie, and then Dracula gets, injured, and you get to see how Renfield has to step in and take care of him. And so that was going to be what all of this stuff was leading up to. It's like, Renfield, I need this. Renfield, I need that. We got to go over here. We're moving here. Now we got to get to this town. Vampire hunters are coming. And kind of, use that all around all of these other, movies that we were sort of like, drawing from. And then boom, you get to this place where it's like, Renfield, I need you. Pack it up. We got to go to the next, location, and I need to get back to full power.
But now that you've explained it like this, I think it's a great lesson because, they always say like, have a great first 10 pages, right? Have a great first 10 minutes of your film that really engages the audience. If you just started with them walking around New Orleans looking for cheerleaders, and people to feed to Dracula, it would have worked. I'm sure it would have worked because the movie's still funny and over the top and crazy. But having that connection and that history and cycling into it that way and having, as you just said, a great third act of some other movie as the start of your movie was a great idea. And I think it's what won over the audience because, there were some people that would walk into this movie saying, wait, is it just going to be What We Do in the Shadows? And actually it's not, because What We Do in the Shadows is office-style documentary television that's very funny, Emmy nominated multiple times for writing. I love the show. But you're familiar.
Show and the movie. Yeah. It's a pretty good movie, too.
Of course. I was the original Sundance screening of the movie. I absolutely love that movie.
Oh, wow.
I was so elated when they turned that into a TV show.
Yeah.
But your Renfield from the start has superpowers, which obviously the familiars and What We Do in Shadows do not. And by showing that and showing that the bugs actually give him powers and then connects to the dysfunctional relationship he has with Dracula, because it's like, well, you don't want to go away from him because he's giving you these powers that you enjoy. Yeah. Like it again all goes back to the same, concept of breaking away, which is what this movie's about, and trying to stand on your own. So I really commend you for fighting the good fight on keeping that opening. And I didn't realize it was going to be even a fight because it just seems so organic to the movie.
It's one of those things that I think could go either way with an audience. But for me, the idea that Dracula gives you these powers, again, continues that metaphor of why we work for somebody, again, taking all the supernatural stuff out of it. The idea, you're being given power, you're being given access to this world and things like that. That was another thing that was just important to me, that Dracula has to be giving him something that would just be undeniable that Renfield would want to be, a part of on some level, or at least be conflicted about it. Those were things anyway that you would just, when you said that, this reminded me that just how each of these things was meant to be about something that, that had a metaphoric relationship with what you go through in a codependent relationship with somebody who's got power over you.
I mean, it worked perfectly. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. We recently published our Oscar issue. It was our 10th Oscar issue because we've been around. We're coming up on 11 years this June. And, after the Oscars, we always put new content in the magazine. So there's always new things to see. For instance, Evil Dead Rise is going into the magazine, and that will be an interesting article for folks to read. And you could always check to see what's new over at backstory.net. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue. And if you like what you see, and I hope you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine Podcasting YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. It would really mean a lot to me to have you become a subscriber, so thanks for considering. Of course, I also hope you check out our sponsor, Screencraft, over at screencraft.org. You know, Screencraft helps writers with the craft and writing and business of filmmaking. Screencraft.org has everything for your writing journey, from screenwriting educational material and lectures with your favorite writers like J.J. Abrams and Sofia Coppola, just to name a few, to hands-on career consulting coaching with their writer development team. Their genre-specific screenwriting competitions feature judges that include Oscar and Emmy award-winning writers and top literary reps as well, so they've got storytelling covered. This year's comedy competition welcomes executive producer Ted Lasso and Shrinking Bill Lawrence as their grand juror. And at the end of the contest, he will select one winner to mentor from the competition. Hundreds of past writers and finalists have started their career with the direct support of Screencraft. Take, for instance, the experience of Shiwani Srivastava. After placing in the Screencraft comedy competition, the Screencraft team not only helped Shiwani develop her script, but pitched and ultimately sold the project to Netflix. They also introduced her to her literary manager over at Affirmative Entertainment. So if you're an aspiring writer, go check out all the opportunities offered at Screencraft over at screencraft.org. But now let's jump right back into our conversation with director Chris McKay about his latest film, Renfield. What were some of the left turns? What were some of the things that you were thinking of doing that you didn't have the budget, money, or time for?
Ryan had written a very funny script, and a lot of the humor came out of side characters, the henchmen and the Lobos and things like that. I mean, part of the reason the Lobo family was there was because there was a lot of colorful characters as the Lobo henchmen. And that stuff that, you know, after a while was stuff that just had to get deleted before we even shot it. It also sort of helped ground the world a little bit. We don't have any scenes other than with Awkwafina and Nick Holt where we sort of talk about like Dracula, where he tells her that he works for Dracula and she says Dracula as though she knows what a Dracula is. Those scenes were sort of like meant to sort of like help you understand that people knew there was something supernatural going on out in the world, that they were afraid of somebody who was like, you know, stalking the Lobos, and there's a lot of bad guys had gone missing and stuff like that. So like, you know, it was fun and funny, and also kind of helped kind of just gave a little more world building to the world that we ended up having to cut, which is unfortunate.
Obviously, your first big action scene in this movie, you know, chronologically, I don't know how it was shot, was the restaurant scene. And you have this great thing of like, you know, two protagonists in the same situation, just like what you said earlier, versus antagonists that, you know, from Terry, the mom, and Dracula are coming at them in the same fashion as well. What was your big lesson of shooting an action scene like that, which again is a testament to tone, because so many gory, crazy things are happening, but it's all in the delivery of humor, but it's also not parody specifically. It's a tight balance to walk.
You know, it started with working with Chris Brewster, who was our stunt coordinator and second unit director. And he and I said, look, the Chris has a real brutal style. Like his style's really, he did the hallway fight in Daredevil TV series. He was Daredevil in that hallway fight in costume, but he's got a real brutal style that I think is, you know, kind of grounds it in, you know, sort of something that feels like, you know, like you said, it gives that kind of like, oh, when you see something happen, which I really like. I like that, eliciting those kinds of reactions. But, you know, I knew that our fight scenes had to have a purpose. They had to have a goal. They had either a character or a plot goal. And in this case, I knew that Renfield had to be able to do some fighting that wouldn't be so supernatural that it would sort of blow, you know, the reality with that Awkwafina would, you know, Rebecca would see him do something so clearly. So it would be very clear that she was busy doing something while he saw something else. You know, the audience could see him do some amazing things, but Awkwafina wouldn't necessarily see him do some amazing things. She had to give as good as he does. So I want to be able to show how competent, you know, and good that she was, and that like a Jackie Chan fight scene, there needed to be things that were amusing or charming. And then there also had to be a gory component to it. So there had to be, you know, the arms getting cut off, or, you know, or the table going through the guy's chest or whatever. So there had to be all of those things kind of had to go. And, you know, I wanted to show like every time he would save her, you know, she would save him. And there'd all be this, you know, kind of, you know, it's almost like a dance, almost like a romance. It's almost like a meet cute kind of thing, but done as a fight scene.
A lot of blood.
Miku with a lot of blood. And there needed to be a big contrast between the fight and then how charming and almost romantic comedy their conversation would be afterwards. That she would think it was cool what he was doing and all that kind of thing. So it starts with that kind of planning, and Chris did a really great job with the stunt viz, so you could kind of just see immediately like what was working and what wasn't, where we needed to kind of buttress something. And that was actually the first fight scene that we shot. And basically we were shooting during COVID, and the other complication to that scene was that we had a close contact with one of our actors with someone who had COVID, and so we had to not have them on set. So then there were some complications as far as scheduling goes, and so we shot certain things without one of the actors and then brought them back and so there was a lot of that we had to figure out along the way. COVID was it was still a big deal when we shot this thing, so we had some pretty heavy COVID restrictions on extras and all sorts of stuff, so it was tricky.
Spread out in just the right ways, like some of the movies that have been shot during lockdowns and beyond, where they've made the room seem full, but people are really still distanced in the room. Some of the kills in here are like, on the level of Black Knight from Monty Python's and the whole grit. Like people's arms are being chopped off, they're being battered against them. I think the craziest kill in the movie is Teddy. In the end, when literally bones are coming out of his mouth and his ass. On an dial. Tell me about creating that shot, because it was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the movie needs to escalate, in every level, whether it's dramatically or comedically or in this case, in some splatstick terms. Right. There needs to be a big ending for Teddy Lobo, no pun intended, I guess. And so we tossed around a bunch of different ideas, and the thing that seemed to stick was I sort of liken it to Mortal Kombat. I wanted there to be like a big, fatality moment at the end of the movie. So, and obviously, I think in Mortal Kombat there's sort of an X-ray version. That was actually lifted from stuff they used to do in 70s martial arts movies. There's Ricky O. Ricky O might have been in the 80s maybe, but Ricky O is a movie. There's an X-ray part of it. In that movie, in Tony Jaa's The Protector, they do an X-ray bit, which I always thought was really, really great towards the end of that movie, where you see the tendons snap on a guy that he punches. So that's kind of a loving homage to some of that stuff too. And a great way to just show, what's going on inside Teddy's body as Renfield does the super kick, and just, each of his bones is exploding and his guts are flying, in one direction or another. And I just feel like it felt like, we had to top ourselves somehow. And it seems to work with audiences. People seem to really like that moment. Yeah.
The crowd cheered absolutely at the Aero Theater. What was the deleted scene you missed that you think audiences would love knowing about?
The deleted scene that was the most fun was this dance sequence that after Renfield meets Rebecca and she tells him he's a hero, and he kind of leaves the restaurant, kind of, walking on air, and this kind of music starts, and we were going to use Jackie Wilson's Higher and Higher. Mark Nylund did a kind of a modern version of Jackie Wilson's Higher and Higher. And Renfield's kind of like walking out of there, and he's just the spirits being moved by the feeling that he has. And he starts just kind of doing these tiny little dance moves, very small to himself. And then as the music starts to build and build and build, he spins into the camera and he goes into an alley, and he's dancing with 30 dancers in an alley. And he's just, there's maggots that he's dancing with, and giant, costume cockroaches and maggots and flies, and it just builds, and then that's when Dracula interrupts and says, "You got to come back to the lair." That was a scene that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to shoot. Holt spent a lot of time doing the choreography for that thing. It was just one of those things that, in the studio, wanting to have the movie hit a certain runtime, and it did sort of steal a little bit from the montage later, because it was tonally, it was in some ways very similar to the montage after Renfield leaves the coda, and they're so close to each other that it felt a little bit like maybe it was like one step too far.
It was like pacing and redundancy was the issue there.
At the end of the day, yeah.
I can't wait to see that on the Blu-ray. So I hope it.
Yeah.
What was your toughest scene? What was the scene that you kept stressing about over and over again? And how did you rise to the challenge? What was the scene that you were sweating?
The toughest scene was that, that apartment scene with Renfield and Cage. It was really well written, but again, it was one of those things that, there's a lot of moving parts in that. It has to be funny, but it also has to be emotional, and it kind of has to flow back and forth. And he has to, Dracula has to be intimidating. He has to be a little bit, afraid of Cage and what's he going to do. But also you have to be amused by him. So it's one of those things. It's like, it's got a million hurdles that have to be gone over by everybody, every department, everybody, the camera, everything. Everyone has to be right on. The department set has to work, and be able to look, the contrast of Dracula in this apartment has to kind of almost be immediately funny. Just seeing him sitting in this hyper saturated orange and green and apartment with all these self-help posters and things like that. Like everything has to work. The costumes have to work. Everything has to work. So, and because we're still trying to make it an apartment and shoot, I don't want to necessarily pull walls away, even if it is a set, if I can figure out a way to still shoot in it. I still want that kind of intimacy. I don't want you to feel like it's a set necessarily. I want you to feel like it is an apartment. So I and the team, we give ourselves some challenges a lot of times because we want it to feel a certain way. So there's a lot of challenges, there to get the camera in there. But, I had a great camera operator, Jeff Haley, who was incredible. And a lot of people, again, rose the challenge. Cage and his facial expressions and just the way that's where the Anne Bancroft, Mrs. Robinson stuff came up with Cage, that was sort of an inspiration for that scene because it's like he and Renfield are lovers and he knows that Renfield's been cheating on him. And so he's just giving Renfield enough rope to hang himself. And Cage is just sort of like kind of trying to keep it all in while Renfield's just lying to him. And he's just trying to just bottle it all up. He clearly can't help express himself somehow that he's just sort of pretending to listen and go along with what Renfield says, even though he's got something he wants to say. All that stuff, and the fact that Cage and Holt could just flow back and forth between the dramatic stuff and the comedic stuff, it was just that was a hard scene. But again, I was blessed with such great partners. We got through it, and it turned out really great. It's my favorite scene in the movie.
Could there be a sequel? I mean, like the cocaine bags had a wolf on it, so there could be going on there. Obviously, Cage chopped up into concrete ice cubes of sorts, and all the people from group therapy had come back to life from his blood. So we don't know how codependent they are on him, but you have an idea of a sequel.
I think the studio and the producers were, took the lesson of the Dark Universe very, very seriously and didn't want to talk about sequels or didn't want to think about sequels, just want to make a good movie. I think that's the right thing to do, to be honest with you. Like, I think just try to make this one great. Have fun. Make it a fun, night out at the movies. Don't take it so seriously, and don't do a lot of world building stuff like that. Absolutely. I hope that this movie makes people want to make more movies that are kind of the tone. There's a little bit of horror, a little bit of comedy. You have some fun with it. You don't take it so. We need movies that don't take themselves so seriously. I love. Tar was one of my favorite movies. Of last year. Just to be clear, like this is not a slam on movies that take themselves seriously. I love Tar.
It was just a way for a group of people to come together in the audience and kick up their shoes and relax and know that they were going to have some fun because it was absolutely over the top.
Celebrate our mutual love for Universal movies and Dracula and Cage and Holt and also get a nice little message about if someone's got power over you, you can take that power back. They don't have power unless you give it to them. You can take that back. If you're looking for that idea, if that's something that's open, you're open to that, or you need that, it's there in the movie, and the rest of it's. How can a guy, turn somebody's arms into a screamo sticks and beat the shit out of a bunch of guys and spear a guy and rip a guy's face off and, jump on a guy's face and split him in half? Like, it should be fun. Yeah, I love all kinds of movies, but I want to make sure that there's movies that are fun. And I hope somebody gets inspired to do something else that's fun with other Universal monsters. I think that to me would be a great legacy of this movie.
Well, I had an absolute blast watching it, and I cannot wait to see what you do next. Chris, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to director Chris McKay for being so generous with his time and chatting about his latest film, the always hilarious and action-packed Renfield. And I hope you also check out our sponsor, Screencraft, over at screencraft.org. They have a ton of educational resources, and they also have genre-specific screenwriting competitions. For instance, their comedy competition this year will have the executive producer of Ted Lasso and Shrinking, Bill Lawrence, as their grand juror, and he will select one writer to mentor from the competition. So if you're an aspiring writer, go check out all the opportunities Screencraft has to offer at screencraft.org. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We recently published our Oscar issue. It was our 10th Oscar issue because we've been around. We're coming up on 11 years this June. And, after the Oscars, we always put new content in the magazine. So there's always new things to see. For instance, Evil Dead Rise is going into the magazine, and that will be an interesting article for folks to read. And you could always check to see what's new over at backstory.net. You know, if you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue in our Backstory app on an iPad or at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop. And if you like what you see, and I hope you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. It would really mean a lot to me to have you become a subscriber. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2023. All rights reserved. I'm a pretty easy to get a hold of fella, so if you want to follow me on social media, you could find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_mag on Twitter, or those same handles work for Instagram as Yo Goldsmith on Instagram or Backstory_mag on Instagram. I also have a Facebook fan page. You could reach out there as well, and you could also write in anytime to backstoryletters@gmail.com, and I will do my darndest to get back to you as soon as I can. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you again for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.